In competitive Pokemon, items are everything. Items like the Flame Orb, the Choice Specs, the Focus Sash, and the Assault Vest have all had significant impacts on competitive Pokemon's legacy, with these items being integral parts of the metagame, allowing for things outside of stats and abilities to balance out what is popular. That being said, with the release of Pokemon Champions, a lot of items weren't included in the game, such as the Choice Specs, the Assault Vest, the Iron Ball, and many other more fringe items that aren't used on a lot of teams, but still see some niche use. What I want to talk about today is the fact that a lot of these items are going to return at some point, and which items I think need to return sooner than other ones. Let's just get right into it. If you guys enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, become a YouTube channel member, hype the video, all of that. And hey, you definitely want to subscribe because at 300,000 subscribers, I'll be ranking every bench in Lumio City. Let's just begin. First item I want to talk about, the Rocky Helmet. The Rocky Helmet is an item in competitive Pokemon that has only really been used on a few Pokemon over time, mostly redirection users like Amoonguss or Mousehold, but it has always been a more niche item. The only reason I'm including it in this list is because it is literally on the shop menu, and that is ridiculous. Why is the item not in the game when it's on the menu? I suppose this also applies to the Flame Orb and stuff, but let's just ignore that for now. Now I want to talk about the real items that I think need to be added sooner than others. First up, the Safety Goggles. The Safety Goggles are an item which prevented hail damage back in the day as well as sand damage, but also prevents the use of powder moves against the user. This allows for the user to ignore moves like Sleep Powder and Spore, but also ignore Rage Powder. This item has been useful on a wide variety of Pokemon, whether they be redirection users to force the opponent to use a Spore into them and protect its partner from sleep, or just a Pokemon that is meant to counter these sleep users, such as Incineroar, which is arguably the most famous Safety Goggles user of all time. Incineroar has the capacity to deal with Pokemon like Venusaur and Amoonguss if it has access to a sleep immunity. At this point, Pokemon Champions only has the Lumberry and Chestoberry as a way to prevent sleep, but these items are far more niche and don't allow for a more wide range of use cases such as the Safety Goggles. The Safety Goggles not only allows for Pokemon like Incineroar to attack into a Venusaur or Amoonguss without worrying about the Sleep Powder landing into them, but it also allows for them to ignore Rage Powder from the likes of Sinistcha and opposing Amoonguss. As of right now, Venusaur Charizard is a very strong combo, with Venusaur being able to get double speed with Chlorophyll due to Charizard Wise Sun, go for a Sleep Powder, and allow the Charizard to just play the game with many of its most annoying opponents like Aerodactyl incapacitated. But due to the fact that there are no Safety Goggles in the game, this strategy just becomes a little bit more annoying to play against than it really should be. While Venusaur and Charizard have always been a very strong combo in VGC, the lack of the Safety Goggles is definitely exacerbating that at this point in time, so we definitely need that back. Next up is the Life Orb, and honestly, I'm considering not even putting the Life Orb on this list because I do think that there is a specific purpose for the Life Orb not being included. I'm going to explain that, but then I'm also going to explain the reason I think the Life Orb does need to come back. So the Life Orb is an item that grants the user a 30% boost in power at the expense of some of their health every time they use an attack that does damage. This has historically been a very powerful item on like really powerful special attackers with spread damage moves like Chi-Yu. However, the Life Orb is an item that applies across the board to any attacker in the game if you're willing to sacrifice that little bit of health for the damage you want to dish out. At this point in the game, I think the Life Orb isn't included specifically to allow certain Mega Pokemon to outshine their previous forms. Now, this mostly applies to the Mega Drampas and Mega Greninjas of the world, so they're not exactly the most useful Pokemon at this point anyways, but if the Life Orb were to be introduced, those Mega forms would basically see no play whatsoever, as the Life Orb version of their previous form is just going to be a lot more useful and more affordable for a team rather than using an entire Mega Pokemon over it. But I do think that the Life Orb allows for a certain level of damage output from lower power attackers that aren't Mega Pokemon to let the game be a little bit less centralized. And there's another item coming up on this list that I'll talk about right after this that also fixes this issue. So let's just go ahead and jump right into that one because it's sort of the same reason for both of these items. I think the Choice Specs has to come back to Pokemon Champions sooner rather than later. The thing is, currently in Pokemon Champions, it is a metagame revolving around getting as much immediate damage on the board to the opposing team to allow your Pokemon in back to clean up. Basically, the more you chunk and chip away at the lead Pokemon, the easier it is to get in a winning position. But due to this being sort of the state of the metagame, Pokemon like Charizard, Megafloet Eternal, and Sylveon are basically the best Pokemon to do this job, as they offer high damaging spread special attacks that don't have to worry about the likes of Intimidate or anything like that. And the lack of good Snarl users and lack of Grim Snarl means that special attacks have the most consistent damage output game to game. Getting this huge damage off on the board is the reason that Charizard and Sylveon and Floette see this level of usage, as there aren't very many Pokemon who can compete with them for that level of power. But the introduction of the Choice Specs and the Life Orb allow for these Pokemon with lower overall special attack stats or physical attack stats, depending on which item we're talking about and what Pokemon you apply it to. It means that these Pokemon, like Ninetales or Alolan Ninetales with an 81 special attack stat, but still have like weather and high damaging moves, are able to chunk for considerable damage on lead and be able to fill in that role rather than just having to default to the top 3 special attackers in the metagame right now. I would argue that the 3 Pokemon that have the most to gain from these items being introduced back into Pokemon Champions would be Hisuian Zoroark, Hisuian Typhlosion, and of course, like I mentioned before, both of the Ninetales. These Pokemon do have pretty good damage output, save for the Ninetales, but it's not nearly at the level that it needs to be to compete with the likes of Floette, Charizard, and Sylveon. Historically, these Pokemon have all been pretty phenomenal leads that do what Charizard, Sylveon, and Floette do, just in other games. This is either due to the existence of the Life Orb and Choice Specs or the mechanic of Terra. But since none of these exist within the game, it is a very over-centralized lead metagame, where you do want to lead off with your Aerodactyls, Charizards, or whatever spread damage you have. And one of the most notable things about including these items is that the Pokemon that are already at the top of the metagame, like Charizard and everything that I've been mentioning this whole time, don't benefit from these items, as Charizard and Floette both need to hold a Mega Stone, so does Aerodactyl, and Sylveon wants to hold the Fairy Feather anyway, so nothing really changes with them so much as other Pokemon get buffed from these items being introduced. But yeah, the centralization of spread damage is something that I do have an issue with in the current metagame of Pokemon Champions, so we do need these items to come back in my opinion. Speaking of the centralization of special damage output, Charizard and all these Pokemon wouldn't be nearly as strong in the metagame if we had access to the Assault Vest. Like I said, currently in the metagame, there isn't a Grim Snarl, there's only like a Sableye setting up light screens and stuff. The best Snarl user is a Scarf Hydreigon, which is going to be way more niche, and you're not likely to see game to game to the point where special damage is kind of king right now. Also, the lack of the Assault Vest. The Assault Vest is an item which grants the user a 50% boost in their special defense stat at the expense of not being able to use non-damaging moves. Introducing this item allows for many more Pokemon to have positive matchups into these powerful special attackers that are currently running the roost. Incineroar is already a great matchup into a lot of these Pokemon, but being able to bolster its special defense to the point where it's kind of just soaking up these hits and moving on with its day is going to allow for the metagame to get a little bit bulkier and slow down the pace of play, as Pokemon Champions is currently a very fast metagame. This also allows for the likes of Archaladon to return to its old playstyle instead of having to run leftovers, and allows plenty of other physical attackers to be able to do their job a lot better without having to worry about taking a ton of damage from the powerful special attackers that run the metagame. Like I mentioned, Pokemon like Incineroar will benefit from the Assault Vest, meaning that unlike the Choice Specs and Life Orb, there are existing meta Pokemon that will be buffed by the introduction of this item, like Kingambit or Archaladon, which both would love to have access to this item, but the introduction of more viable physical attackers that have a lower special defense stat, such as Conkeldurr or Rhyperior, allowing them to have that Assault Vest and be able to have better matchups into these powerful special attackers does diversify the game a little bit more, but not to a point of absolute chaos. I think that the Assault Vest is a necessary item for balance, at least in Season 3 or whatever season they introduce it into. Obviously, these items will have to be introduced slowly over time, and I think that they're pacing out the introduction of these items with regard to the Pokemon that they introduce season to season. So for all we know, we'll be getting the Assault Vest next season due to them dropping like Chi-Yu or something with ridiculous special damage output. But I think as things stand, while we don't have a ton of powerful special attackers, and that's why we don't have access to the Assault Vest yet, I think that that was an oversight because the lack of Assault Vest leads to the few powerful special attackers we have being way too strong. The final item that I think needs to be introduced in the next season of Pokemon Champions is going to be the Covert Cloak. Now, the Covert Cloak is an item which is very, very good in competitive Pokemon. Some of its best users have been the likes of Talonflame or Whimsicott, but this item will do far more than what it did in previous seasons of competitive Pokemon. Previously, it was mostly used as a simple anti-fake-out tool, but the Covert Cloak prevents all secondary effects of any move coming your way. Most famously, flinching, which is why you used it on these lead Pokemon that set up Tailwind. But introducing the Covert Cloak also allows for Pokemon to be much more comfortable playing into the Rock Slide heavy metagame that we exist in right now. Garchomp and Aerodactyl both run Rock Slide not as a I want to flinch you every single game sort of play, but more as a necessary counter to the powerful special attackers in the format, namely Mega Charizard Y. The overabundance of Rock Slide in this metagame has led to people calling the format of Regulation MA the Rock Slide Simulator, where it really just comes down to whether or not you can avoid getting flinched. The Covert Cloak is more or less a consistency item that sees high levels of use at the higher end of competitive play, because consistency is king at that point. You're not really fishing for luck, you're trying to play as best as you can and minimize the RNG that is out of your control. By equipping the Covert Cloak on Pokemon, it allows for you to avoid RNG from Rock Slide, random burns from Heat Wave, and of course Dire Claw, even though that move has been nerfed. I think the Covert Cloak is arguably one of the most consequential items that hasn't been included in Pokemon Champions. And I can kind of understand why. The Covert Cloak might lead to Pokemon like Whimsicott being a little bit too strong, with them being objectively the best Tailwind setter, but as long as the Covert Cloak gets reintroduced with the correct Pokemon that counter Whimsicott, it won't be a big issue. But yeah, that was just a quick video on my thoughts on which items need to be reintroduced into Pokemon Champions sooner rather than later. Hopefully these items will come in Regulation MB or whatever in Season 3, which happens mid-June. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me, and I will be uploading more Patreon videos and more supporter videos for YouTube channel members. My goal is to get the first one of a new series out today. That way I can plug it in like tomorrow's video and hopefully bolster my Patreon stuff, because I think direct support is going to be something that's super helpful to me right now. But if you want to support me right now anyways, despite not a lot of content being on the Patreon or the YouTube member stuff, you can still get a perk in access to my Discord server where we host tournaments every Monday and we team build and work together. So yeah, that is that's accessible if you support me on any of the platforms, whether it be YouTube memberships or Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.